The orange late-afternoon sky extends over Camp Sycamore as the group of young people get off the rental van. The bags, backpacks, and sleeping bags were unloaded in a hurry, while the driver, a man full of spent goods, grumbled about the delay of the trip. "This place is amazing," exclaimed Lisa, a young woman with curly hair and easy smile, turning to look around. The camp was surrounded by tall trees, almost suffocating in their density, but the central clearing seemed cozy. There were simple wooden cottages, a large central hut and, at the back, a path that serpented into the forest. Mark, the informal leader of the group, examines his sunglasses and looks skeptically at the place. "It doesn't look so bad." He went back to the rest of the group. "Let's unload and see what else this retreat has to offer." They were part of a nature reconnection program, something that Lisa had organized after weeks of insisting I needed a break from the city and its exhausting routines. Besides her and Mark, there was Rachel, the more introspective, who was already taking pictures of the landscape with her professional camera, Connor, the group's jokester, who was already making jokes about the place being the perfect setting for a horror movie, and Jenny, who seemed less liberated, focused on the cell phone while guiding the group with slow steps. While they settled in the cottages, a low sound of ecological bell or clearing. All turned to the direction of a larger hut, where an old man, standing upright and piercing look, watched them. He wore simple clothes, but his worn leather boots and felt hat gave him a striking presence. "Welcome to Camp Sycamore," he announced, with a low voice that resonated with authorities. "My name is Mr. Willard, and I am responsible for this place." He paused, his eyes closely approaching. "I hope you follow the rules and respect the marked areas. The forest can be treacherous for those who do not know it." Lisa stepped forward, radiant. "Thank you for having us, Mr. Willard. We are very excited to be here." He nodded with a slight smile, but his eyes were focused on Mark, who crossed his arms and looked around him with suspicion. "I hope you're ready to hear stories too. This camp is full of them." He pointed to a fire in the center of the clearing. "Meet there later. I have something to tell you that may interest you." The night came quickly, bringing an unexpected cold. The group gathered around the crackling fire, lighting their faces with a warm glow. Mr. Smith was there. Willard was sitting in a carved wooden chair, looking older under the dancing shadows. "Do you know why this place is called Camp Sycamore?" he began, looking directly at Jenny, who was distracted with her cell phone. Without waiting for a response, he continues. "Because of a tree. A single sycamore, much older than any of us, and which holds secrets that many prefer to forget." The young people exchanged glances, some curious, others nervous. Connor, trying to ease the mood, commented, "Let me guess. It's a tree that kills people in horror movies, right?" Mr. Willard didn't shine. "Some say she kills. Others say she guards. But everyone agrees on one thing: she never forgot." Rachel passed the hand, as if she was in school. "What's the story?" Willard took a deep breath, leaning closer to the fire. "There was once a woman who lost everything. She came to this forest for peace, but found something very different. She offered her pain to the tree, and the tree accepted. What happened next was destroyed. But they say that since then the sycamore tree has never been alone." The group remained silent, absorbing a strange story. Mark rolled his eyes and declared, It's just a story to scare tourists. Come on, guys, we have a trail to do tomorrow. As everyone dispersed, Rachel looked back, watching Mr. Willard, who was still staring at the fire, murmur something inaudible. In the distance, among the shadows of the forest, the silhouette of a tree seemed to observe them immensely. The rising sun was crossing the dense canopy of trees as the group gathered at the entrance to the trail. The air was fresh, carrying the aroma of moist earth and dried leaves. Mark led the way, machete in hand, cutting small points that hindered the passage. "How many miles are the same?" said Connor, already sweating. He held a bottle of water and walked slowly, as if commenting on the decision to join the tour. "Only 5 to the lookout," replied Lisa, excited. "And the view there is amazing, according to the campsite." Rachel follows further back, taking pictures of the way. His camera captured everything: the diffused light that penetrated between the branches, the moss growing in the trees, and even the footprints that the group left on the damp earth. Jenny came just behind, short steps and equipment on the phone, although the signal had disappeared hours ago. "Hey, Jenny," teased Connor, "we'll update your status to lost in the middle of nowhere?" "Shut up, Connor," she replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "At least I didn't bring a pair of punctured sneakers for a trail." Willard took a deep breath, leaning closer to the fire. "There was once a woman who lost everything. She came to this forest for peace, but found something very different. She offered her pain to the tree, and the tree accepted. What happened next was destroyed. But they say that since then the sycamore tree has never been alone." The group remained silent, absorbing a strange story. Mark rolled his eyes and declared, "It's just a story to scare tourists. Come on, guys, we have a trail to do tomorrow." As everyone dispersed, Rachel looked back, watching Mr. Willard, who was still staring at the fire, murmur something inaudible. In the distance, among the shadows of the forest, the silhouette of a tree seemed to observe them immensely. The rising sun was crossing the dense canopy of trees as the group gathered at the entrance to the trail. The air was fresh, carrying the aroma of moist earth and dried leaves. Mark led the way, machete in hand, cutting small points that hindered the passage. "How many miles are the same?" said Connor, already sweating. He held a bottle of water and walked slowly, as if commenting on the decision to join the tour. "Only 5 to the lookout," replied Lisa, excited. "And the view there is amazing, according to the campsite." Rachel follows further back, taking pictures of the way. His camera captured everything: the diffused light that penetrated between the branches, the moss growing in the trees, and even the footprints that the group left on the damp earth. Jenny came just behind, short steps and equipment on the phone, although the signal had disappeared hours ago. "Hey, Jenny," teased Connor, "we'll update your status to lost in the middle of nowhere?" "Shut up, Connor," she replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "At least I didn't bring a pair of punctured sneakers for a trail." The group went down the trail, calling out Jenny's name. The silence of the forest seemed more oppressive now, and the steps echoed like drums in the compacted earth. After a few minutes, they saw something on the ground: Jenny's phone, thrown next to a bush. "That's not good," Connor muttered, picking up the braces. The screen was cracked, but still displayed the last message that Jenny had tried to type: "I'm not alone." Lisa got involved when she read the words. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, the same sound of heavy steps that Mark heard earlier echoed again, this time closer. The surrounding trees seemed to shake, and a cold feeling ran through the group. hoot, attracting Mark, pulling Lisa by the arm. The group shot down the trail, their hearts beating like drums. But the sound continued, the steps closer and closer, until suddenly they ceased. The group stopped, panting, trying to understand what had happened. It was then that Rachel, still holding the camera, pointed to the forest ahead. "There, did you see that?" His voice was low, tremendous. Among the trees, a dark figure watched them. It was tall, with indistinct contours, as if made of its own shadow. His eyes shone in a pale and cold shade, fixed on them. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then, as if it was never there, the figure disappeared into the forest. "Let's go back," said Mark, with a firm voice, but the sweat on his forehead revealed his nervousness. Without discussion, the group ran back to the camp, leaving behind Jenny's phone and the echo of what was lurking. Observing. When they reached the clearing where they had set up their tents, everyone let out a sigh of relief, but it was brief. "What now?" said Connor, looking at Mark, clearly expecting an answer. "We can't just stay here. Jenny is still out there." "We need help," said Mark, wiping his forehead. "We have to alert the camp staff and, if necessary, call the authorities." "What shall we say?" interrupted Rachel, still grabbing her camera as if it were a protective amulet. "That we saw a shadow with bright eyes? They'll call us crazy." "So we invent something," Lisa replied, impatient. "The important thing is to find it." Mark happened with a nod, but before he could decide who would get help, a scream broke the silence. He was sharp, desperate, and came from the forest. "Jenny!" Lisa ran towards the sound, but Mark held her by the arm. "Wait! And it's not for her?" Lisa looked at him, indignant. "Who else would it be? We can't leave her there." She let go and started running, without waiting for the others. Mark cursed softly before following her, and the rest of the group followed, hesitant. The cry seemed more distant now, but it was still clear enough to guide them. The path became increasingly closed, with thorny branches and roots that appeared out of nowhere, almost as if the forest wanted to prevent its passage. After a few minutes of running, the scream stopped. Lisa suddenly stopped, looking around, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Jenny," she called, but the only answer was the sound of the wind waving the leaves. The group reached Lisa, all equally confused and alarmed. Rachel spoke to her camera and started out, whispering, "If something happens, maybe it helps explain." Mark stepped forward, his eyes scanning the environment. "That doesn't make sense. The sound comes from here." "Or maybe it was a trap," said Connor, his voice wavering. He looked around, as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows at any moment. "That's wrong. Very wrong." Lisa opened her mouth to answer, but something on the floor caught her eye. "Wait, what is that?" In the middle of the trail, there was a small pile of stones, neatly stacked. At the top, something shone under the filtered light, Jenny's necklace. Lisa picked up the object with trembling hands. "It's hers," she whispered. "I gave her this for her birthday." Mark looked at the pile of stones, frowning. "It wasn't here before. Someone did it, now. And why would they leave it?" said Connor, crossing his arms as if trying to protect himself. "Before we discuss," Rachel brought a camera into the forest. "Are you listening to that?" It was a low sound, like whispering, but without discernible words. It seemed to come from all directions, mixing with the wind. The group gathered instinctively, eyes wide. "We're leaving," Mark said in a firm voice. He removed Lisa by the arm. "It's gone too far." "But what about Jenny?" Lisa protested, reluctant to back down. "We'll come back with help," he said, looking at everyone. "There's no point in going on like this." The group started to come back by way, but something was different. The trail I had followed seemed altered, with trees and shrubs in places they did not recognize. Even the ground seemed softer, as if they had gone out of the way without noticing. "Mark," Rachel called, her voice full of panic. "The track wasn't like this before." "We're on the right track," he insisted, trying to be so confident. But even he knew something was wrong. The forest looked darker, as if the sun had disappeared behind a heavy cloud. The suggestions continued, higher and higher, but still without form. Rachel stumbled on a root and fell, uttering a cry. When Mark went to help her get up, he froze. On the tree in front of them, there were carved symbols. They were strange, circular, and radiated a feeling of unease. "Who would do this?" asked Connor, looking at the symbols with wide eyes. Before anyone could answer, a low ecological laugh tore through the forest. It was not human. It was something guttural, reverberating in an unnatural way. The group was paralyzed, all feeling a cold terror crawling through their bones. It was then that I realized they were no longer alone. The sound of guttural laughter echoed as if it came from all sides, surrounding the group. They remained motionless. The silence between them was as dense as the growing darkness around. The air seemed calmer, and Rachel pressed the camera against her chest as if she could protect her. "Mark," whispered Lisa, her eyes fixed on the dense forest. What was that?" "I don't know," Mark replied, trying to keep his voice calm, but it was obvious that he was as terrified as everyone else there. "But we're not going to stay here to find out. Keep walking." They wanted to move, but it was as if the forest had become a living maze. Each tree seemed to approach, each bush seemed to grow and block the way. And then the sound came back, steps. Not of them, but something or someone follows them, moves quickly through the trees, invisible but present. Connor stopped suddenly, panting. "Wait. And is it for Jenny? And she's trying to call us?" "That's not Jenny," said Mark firmly. That's something else." "Something else?" Rachel asked, a tremendous voice. "What do you mean by that?" "I don't know, but we need to get out of here now," he replied. Suddenly, Lisa caught everyone's attention. She pointed to the darkness ahead. "There. I saw something." Everyone looked, but there was nothing, just the darkness. "You're imagining things," said Mark, trying to keep them together. "It's fear. Let's keep going." "No," Lisa insisted. "There was someone there. I saw it. He was looking at us." Before Mark could respond, a sound of something breaking, a branch being crushed under weight, came from the same direction that Lisa pointed. The eyes of all widened, and Connor took a step back, almost stumbling. "This isn't real," he muttered, shaking his head repeatedly. "This isn't happening." Mark advanced, holding Connor by the shoulders. "Focus, Connor. We need to stay together. It's the only chance we have." As they tried to continue, Rachel stopped again, this time pointing at the camera. "I saw it too," she said in a whispered, taped voiceover. "Something is there. You can't see it, but it's there." Mark took her camera, looking at the viewfinder. He adjusted the lens and for a brief moment something appeared, a tall, thin figure standing among the trees. His eyes were unnaturally shining, reflecting the light of the camera. Then, away. "Did you see?" asked Rachel, grabbing his arm. "Says you saw." Mark just nodded, but didn't say anything. He handed the camera back and started to walk faster. "Don't stop. Keep walking. No matter what happens, don't stop." As he went quietly, the forest seemed to change around them. The trees were covered with marks similar to symbols that had been found before, and the ground seemed more moist, as if it was entered into a swamp. Lisa stopped abruptly, uttering a scream. "My God!" she muttered, looking forward. There was something on the ground in front of them, a torn backpack with deep scratches. It was Jenny's backpack. "She was here," said Lisa, helping her pick up the object. "She left this for us." Connor looked around frantically. If she was here, where is she now? Why would she leave it? That doesn't make sense. Rachel started filming the backpack, but before she could record anything useful, the camera shut down by itself. "No. Not now," she exclaimed, pressing the buttons, but the camera did not respond. Mark moved into Lisa, holding her shoulder. "We need to go. That just confirms she's around, but we can't stay." Before it could move, the sound came back, now closer. It was as if they were tendencies of steps coming from all techniques, increasingly high. They looked at each other, the panic evident. And then we saw. Among the trees, forms may arise. Tall, thin, with eyes torn. They were not human. Their shapes were vague, like shadows, but there was something solid in them, something that made the surrounding air seem heavier. "Run," Mark whispered. "Run now." Mark was the first to run, pulling Lisa and shouting for others to follow him. The steps echoed through the forest like thunder, but their footsteps were overshadowed by the steps that pursued them. Rachel held the camera, even if it didn't work, as if it were an anchor to reality, while Connor stumbled, struggling to keep up. The darkness seemed to close around them. The trees were like living barriers, forcing them to follow a path they had not chosen. Mark led the group, dodging low branches and protruding roots until he reached a small clearing illuminated by the faint moonlight. They stopped, panting, trying to catch their breath. "Did you see that?" said Lisa, eyes wide and full of tears. "What were those things?" "No one knows," replied Mark, his voice hoarse. "But they are not human. That's all that matters." Rachel knelt, pressing the camera against her chest. "I feel like we're being played in some kind of game. It doesn't make sense." "None of that." Before Mark could answer, Connor pointed to the ground in the center of the clearing. "Look at that." On the floor, there was a circle of drawings drawn with frightening precision. They were similar to tree recordings, but more detailed, forming an almost hypnotic pattern. In the center of the circle, there was a small pile of objects, a handkerchief that belonged to Jenny, the diary that Lisa had lost and something no one found, a silver necklace with a moon-shaped pendant. "How did this end up here?" said Lisa, her voice full of dread. "We don't leave those things behind," said Rachel, looking around as if she was expecting to see someone hiding in the trees. "They were taken from us." "But how?" Mark bent down to look closer, hesitating before touching the necklace. "Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's—" Before he could finish, the sound came back. It was not steps this time, but a whisper, thousands of indistinct voices murmuring in unison. The forest seemed alive, the air pulsating to the rhythm of sound. "Mark," said Rachel, pulling her shirt. "Get out of there. Now." When Mark backed away, the circle began to glow, a deep and pulsating red. The light was dim at first, but soon it became so intense that they needed to protect their eyes. Then the ground under them began to shake. "That's a warning," said Connor, desperate. "We're confused by something we shouldn't be. We have to get out of here now." "No," says Mark. "What if that's a sign that Jenny is around? What if this circle is for her?" "Or for us," answered Lisa, with a trembling voice. "Perhaps we are next." Suddenly, an invisible force pushed them to the ground. The circle shone even more, and the figures appeared around the clearing. They were the same creatures that the previous ones were persecuted, but now they were closer, almost tangible. His eyes were bright, and his movements were strangely fluid, like shadows being shaped by the wind. Mark quickly manifested himself, trying to help others. "He is sincere. He is sincere. Go out the clearing. Now." They intended, but each time they approached the trees, the creatures blocked their way, forming an impassable barrier. It was as if you were being surrounded. "We're stuck," said Rachel, looking frantically sideways. "There's nowhere to go." Lisa started crying, while Connor shrugged, mumbling to himself. Mark stood in the middle of them, trying to keep calm. "Stay together. Don't split up. We'll find a way." As the creatures moved slowly, the murmurs turned into a low and macabre laugh. One of them reached out an arm, and the silver pendant in the circle sang itself, floating in the air. He turned slowly, casting reflections of light that danced through the trees. Mark reached out, as if trying to grab the pendant. "That might be the key," he said. "If I can." "Are you crazy?" significant Lisa. "Don't touch it. You don't know what's going to happen." "We have no choice," he replied. "If we want to get out of here, we have to understand what's going on." He stepped forward, ignoring the protests of others. When his hand touched the pendant, everything was silent. The light disappeared, as did the creatures, leaving the group alone in darkness. But before I could breathe a relieved breath, a low and distorted voice echoed through the clear. "You crossed the line. Now you are part of it." The silence that was heard by the voice was more terrible than any sound. There was no wind, nor the rustling of leaves. Even his own steps were considered muffled, as if the surrounding air had been sucked out. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm, his short and irregular breathing. "Part of what?" said Rachel, her voice trembling. "What does that mean? Someone answer." Mark quickly manifested himself, trying to help others. "He is sincere. He is sincere. Go out the clearing. Now." They intended, but each time they approached the trees, the creatures blocked their way, forming an impassable barrier. It was as if you were being surrounded. "We're stuck," said Rachel, looking frantically sideways. "There's nowhere to go." Lisa started crying, while Connor shrugged, mumbling to himself. Mark stood in the middle of them, trying to keep calm. "Stay together. Don't split up. We'll find a way." As the creatures moved slowly, the murmurs turned into a low and macabre laugh. One of them reached out an arm, and the silver pendant in the circle sang itself, floating in the air. He turned slowly, casting reflections of light that danced through the trees. Mark reached out, as if trying to grab the pendant. "That might be the key," he said. "If I can." "Are you crazy?" significant Lisa. "Don't touch it. You don't know what's going to happen." "We have no choice," he replied. "If we want to get out of here, we have to understand what's going on." He stepped forward, ignoring the protests of others. When his hand touched the pendant, everything was silent. The light disappeared, as did the creatures, leaving the group alone in darkness. But before I could breathe a relieved breath, a low and distorted voice echoed through the clear. "You crossed the line. Now you are part of it." The silence that was heard by the voice was more terrible than any sound. There was no wind, nor the rustling of leaves. Even his own steps were considered muffled, as if the surrounding air had been sucked out. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm, his short and irregular breathing. "Part of what?" said Rachel, her voice trembling. "What does that mean?" "Someone answer." Mark held the pendant tightly, feeling it pulsate as if it had a life of its own. "I don't know," he muttered. "But we can't just stand here." An invisible trail was revealed before them. It was not a road, but an open passage in the dense vegetation, as if the forest itself were guiding them. The others hesitated, but Mark took the first step. "Are you sure of that?" asked Connor, hesitant. "This may be another trap." "Everything here is a trap," replied Mark, not looking back. "But if we want to find out what happened to Jenny, we have to move on." They walked in a line, the silence broken only by the muffled sound of their footsteps. The trail seemed endless, and the darkness around it was almost palpable. As they advanced, small fragments of memory were coming to invade their minds, like flashes of something that had not been lived. Lisa saw a woman crying by a lake, her tears mixing with the murky water. Rachel saw pale, thin hands stretching out under the ground, trying to grab her. Connor heard childish laughter, distant but unmistakably full of malice. "They're messing with our heads," said Rachel, tremendous. "I don't want to go on. That's not right." When he reached the end of the trail, he found himself in front of a lonely, old, and ruined hut. His walls were covered with the same symbols seen in the clearing, and the door seemed to be open, inviting them. Mark looked at the others. "It's here," he said. "It has to be here." "What if it's a no-return road?" said Lisa, her voice almost whispering. Mark didn't answer. Instead, he pushed the door gently. The interior of the hut was small, poorly lit by a weak lamp that seemed to be on for years. In the center of the room, there was a table with 4 chairs and, on top of it, a wooden board carved with the same symbols as the circle. "I know that," Connor said, his voice taken from the ground. It's like a game." "A game of who?" asked Rachel. "Of them," Connor replied, pointing to the dark corners of the hut. There, the creatures watched them, motionless, with their eyes shining in the gloom. Mark put the pendant in the center of the board, and immediately the pieces were moving by themselves. A text appeared carved in the wood, as if someone was writing it at that moment. It was a clear and direct message. "A choice must be made." "What does that mean?" said Lisa, looking at the others. "Choice over what?" More words came slowly. "Sacrifice. One to save the rest." The message left in shock. Rachel was the first to back off, shaking her head. "This is not real. It can't be real. They want to turn us against each other." Mark took a deep breath, trying to control the growing panic. "Maybe that's it. But what if it isn't? If it's the only way out of here and find Jenny, we have to do something." The creatures around moved, moving slowly. Their shapes seemed less solid, as if the space around them was distorted. The group was cornered, and the tension grew like an unbearable weight. "I will not be sacrificed," said Connor, retreating. "I did not come here to die." "Connor, no one is going to die," said Mark, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "We can find another way out." But before I could argue any more, the door of the hut closed with a bang. The light of the lamp blinked, and the creatures stopped, as if they were waiting for the decision of the group. Mark looked at the board, then at the others. "If we are going to leave someone behind," he said in a somber voice, "it will not be Jenny." The silence of the hut was sharp, interrupted only by the sound of Rachel's accelerated breathing. Mark clutched his hands on the board, fingers shaking, while the words carved in wood shone in a bright red tone. "A sacrifice must be made. Time is running out." The creatures in the corners of the room moved again, their deformed bodies creeping closer. His eyes shone brightly, and their forms became ever more defined, long teeth, elongated fingers, the shadow of hunger stamped on their faces. "That's crazy," concentrated Connor, turning back to the wall. "We don't even know if this is real. How do we know they won't kill us anyway?" Lisa stepped forward, trying to laugh at the group, though she herself trembles. "We need to think clearly. They want to manipulate us. That's what they do. If we play their game, we've already lost." Mark stared at Lisa, the gloomy face. "What if we have no choice? You saw what happened to Jenny. I'm not going to leave her trapped forever. If that's what they want, maybe it's the only way out." Rachel turned abruptly to Mark. "You're talking about how easy it would be, Mark. As if sacrificing someone was normal." His eyes were full of tears. "Who will it be? Who decides? You?" Mark hesitated, but before he could answer, a lamp shone brightly, casting shadows that writhed on the walls. A new message appeared on the board. He who hesitates consumes all. The creatures evolved to a faster advance, their movements accompanied by a grotesque sound, like old wood being crushed. The ground under the feet of the group seemed to shake, and the air became heavy, almost impossible to breathe. "Do something," Connor says. Mark declared suddenly, the pendant in his hand shining with a light that seemed to react to the creatures. He stared at others, his face full of conflict. Maybe we don't have to choose. Perhaps one of us can face them while the others escape." Lisa held her arm. "You're not serious, are you? That's suicide." "And you got another idea?" said Mark. He looked at Rachel and Connor, his look of despair. "If we stay here, we all die. If anyone is facing, the others can find Jenny and leave." Connor shook his head in denial. "I'm not going to be the hero. I didn't come here for that." "And do you think I came?" Mark concentrated back. Lisa stood between them. "Enough. That's exactly what they want, to split us." She turned to the board. "There must be another way." But the board seemed unshakable in its message. The words shone with an intensity that burned the eyes. "Choose or perish." Rachel sobbed, her voice a whisper almost inaudible. Maybe it's me. I can't live with that. I don't know if I can go on." "Don't say that." Lisa includes, holding Rachel by the shoulders. "You won't sacrifice yourself. No one will." The creatures were almost on top of them now, their skeletal fingers stretching out like claws. Mark looked at the group, his face supported by a dark determination. "If no one can choose," he said, softly, "then I choose for us." Before anyone could react, Mark held the pendant tightly and moved away from the center of the hut, placing himself between the group and the creatures. He expressed the pendant, which shone with a blinding light and enlightening. "If that's what you want, take it to me," Mark declared suddenly, the pendant in his hand shining with a light that seemed to react to the creatures. He stared at others, his face full of conflict. Maybe we don't have to choose. Perhaps one of us can face them while the others escape." Lisa held her arm. "You're not serious, are you? That's suicide." "And you got another idea?" said Mark. He looked at Rachel and Connor, his look of despair. "If we stay here, we all die. If anyone is facing, the others can find Jenny and leave." Connor shook his head in denial. "I'm not going to be the hero. I didn't come here for that." "And do you think I came?" Mark concentrated back. Lisa stood between them. "Enough. That's exactly what they want, to split us." She turned to the board. "There must be another way." But the board seemed unshakable in its message. The words shone with an intensity that burned the eyes. "Choose or perish." Rachel sobbed, her voice a whisper almost inaudible. Maybe it's me. I can't live with that. I don't know if I can go on." "Don't say that." Lisa includes, holding Rachel by the shoulders. "You won't sacrifice yourself. No one will." The creatures were almost on top of them now, their skeletal fingers stretching out like claws. Mark looked at the group, his face supported by a dark determination. "If no one can choose," he said, softly, "then I choose for us." Before anyone could react, Mark held the pendant tightly and moved away from the center of the hut, placing himself between the group and the creatures. He expressed the pendant, which shone with a blinding light and enlightening. "If that's what you want, take it to me." "What happened to him?" Rachel whispered, her voice broken by the pain. "He sacrificed himself, and we just kept going, as if nothing had changed." She looked down at the ground, without courage to face the eyes of others. How can we move on after that? Lisa looked at her, her own tired but firm eyes. He did what he thought should be done. We're not here by chance anymore. If he could, he would say to continue, so that his death would not be in vain. Connor, on the other hand, was quiet, lost in his thoughts. He did not speak much, but his expression was a mixture of sympathy and a silent anger against himself. He knew that somehow Mark's decision was linked to his own weaknesses, to his inability to take action. Now I felt that your life was worth less than before. The trail led to a clearing. The scenery ahead was both familiar and disconcerting. There, where the forest seemed to open up into a dirt road, were the ruins of an ancient church, a crumbling structure with fallen walls and a large rusty iron cross that stood alone among the wreckage. Lisa stopped, her breathing accelerated. That's not right. She looked around, as if expecting something to appear in the shadows of the forest. We've never seen this before, right? No, replied Rachel, the fear transmuting in her voice. Never. Connor stepped forward, watching the church with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. It seems that he wanted us to come here. But why? Rachel said, taking the lead. What is this place? Before Lisa could answer, a gust of wind cut through the clearing, making the leaves in the trees shake. The sound of something, or someone, moving behind them made them turn at the same time. But there was nothing, except the emptiness of the forest. There's no more time, Connor muttered, with his tremendous voice. And then, without warning, the earth below them began to shake, as if something was being dug up, something big. The ground gave slightly, and a low and deep sound, as if a huge door was opening, reverberated through the whole environment. The earth opened up in various places around them, revealing twisted roots, broken human bones and ancient relics that are no longer of another era. That's the entrance to what? Lisa whispered, but she didn't have time to finish the sentence. From the bottom of the clearing, something began to form. A human figure, tall and thin, covered by a black cloak, emerged from the shadows. His eyes, like orbs stretched out, penetrated the darkness with an intensity that made even the air around them seem heavier. Rachel took a step back, her body paralyzed by fear. Who are you? The figure was noble, but the smile was not human. His teeth were long and refined, and his voice echoed like a distant but impossibly clear whisper. I am the key to what you have sought, and also the prison of your souls, said the figure. But what you don't understand is that the decision has already been made. There's no going back. The group was silent, unable to react. The presence of this creature, that thing that was no longer human, made them feel as if they were being pulled into a bottomless hole, into a reality where time and death were confused. Rachel stepped forward, her tremendous voice. What do you want from us? What do you want from me? The figure bowed her head, her eyes staring at Rachel with a frightening intensity. You have paid the price, and the game has begun. Mark was just one piece. Now, you are the next pieces to move. The tension increased with each word. The ground kept shaking, and the ruins of the church just came to life, its crumbling walls rising up as if they wanted to trap the group. We don't want to play anymore, Lisa said, her voice steady, but her eyes reflected the fear she couldn't hide. Leave us alone. Mark has done what should be done. A creature laughed. What is done, is done. Your fate has been sealed. But, before I could say more, something strange happened. The board that Mark had left behind, broken in two, began to shine again. The pieces moved by themselves, and the words written before found to disappear, one by one, until only one last line remains. The choice is yours, or the end is eternal. The figure in front of them looked at the board, then at the group, with an expression that seemed to be one of frustration but also of disdain. The final decision is yours. Choose wisely. For nothing is as it seems, and time, my dears, is the greatest enemy of all. And with that, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving the group there, on the edge of an abyss they did not know how to cross. Rachel, Lisa, and Connor were paralyzed for a moment. The weight of the situation was crushing them, and their future seemed as cloudy as what had just been faced. With a last look at the ruins of the church, they knew there was no turning back. The real choice was yet to come, and with it, the true essence of the game in which they were stuck. But now, what would they do with the chance that they were given? The end? Or a beginning?